I met her in a place that smelled like engine oil and rain, the kind of mix that clings to your clothes even after you've left. I was closing up the shop when she walked in, umbrella dripping, holding a car key that looked like it had survived a storm. "This isn't starting," she said, setting the key down on the counter. Her voice had that calm, measured tone people get when they've learned patience the hard way. I looked up. She wasn't what I expected. Mid-40s, maybe, hair pulled back in a way that didn't ask for attention but got it anyway. Not polished, composed. Like she didn't need anyone to notice her, but you couldn't help it. "It's been sitting out all day," she added, glancing at the rain hammering the metal roof. I took the key, nodded, and tried not to stare too long. "Probably the starter relay," I said. "I can check it out tomorrow morning." She smiled, barely. "Tomorrow's fine. I wasn't going anywhere tonight anyway." Something in the way she said that stuck. She leaned against the counter while I filled out the work order, tracing her finger along a grease stain that had long given up pretending to be clean. Silence settled between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. I asked for her name. She hesitated, just for a second, before saying it. I repeated it in my head, like I needed to hear it again later to believe this happened. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. Just that small nod, the kind that feels final but never really is. She came back the next morning before I opened. I found her sitting on the curb, coffee cup in hand, her car parked crookedly by the door. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Figured I'd wait." It wasn't just what she said, it was how. Like she'd been awake for reasons that had nothing to do with her car. I unlocked the door, and she followed me in. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like it was about to start again. She walked around the shop while I got to work, her fingers brushing against the metal shelves, her reflection moving across the dusty window like she didn't quite belong in the daylight. "You're young," she said after a while. I laughed quietly. "You're not the first to notice." She smiled, this time softer. "No, I meant you talk like someone older. Like you've already been disappointed by the world." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just tightened a bolt that didn't need tightening. "Maybe I have," I said finally. She didn't answer, just watched me. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was too much eye contact for strangers, the kind that made the air feel thinner. When I handed her the repaired key, our fingers brushed. Just that. A second, but enough to make my thoughts stumble. She didn't pull away immediately. "Thank you," she said quietly, as if the word itself might spill something she wasn't ready to say. Before she left, she turned back at the door. "This all feels strange," she said. "Like I walked into someone else's story." I smiled without thinking. "Maybe it's just a dream." She paused, eyes searching mine. "Then don't wake up," I added. Her smile broke into something unreadable, not amusement, not sadness. Something between both. Then she left. The door clicked shut, and the sound stayed with me longer than it should have. That night, I found myself replaying it. Her voice, the hesitation, the way her name felt in my mouth. I couldn't explain why, but I knew this wasn't the last time she'd walk into my day. And maybe that's what scared me most, that I was already waiting for her to come back. She came back 2 weeks later. Said it was for an oil change, but her car was spotless, the engine humming fine. "I just didn't want it to get worse later," she said when I mentioned it. I didn't argue. She stood near the entrance, arms folded, pretending to study the old license plates hung on the wall. It was Saturday, quiet, just the ticking of tools cooling down and the faint hum of a ceiling fan fighting the heat. "You can sit," I told her, nodding toward the stool by my workbench. She hesitated before perching on the edge, like she wasn't planning to stay long. The smell of her perfume barely cut through the motor oil. Faint, clean, not something you notice unless you're too close. I tried not to be too close. We talked about her car first, then about her commute, then about the rain again. Her voice carried that same calm control, but something about it wavered, like a note played a little off-key. At one point, she laughed at something I said, really laughed. It caught me off guard. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't careful either. For a moment, she looked 10 years younger, like the laughter surprised her too. But then she stopped, almost immediately. Her hand went to her necklace, fingers brushing the small pendant there. It was such a small gesture, but it was enough to change the air between us. Sorry, she murmured. It's been a while since I found anything funny. I looked up from under the hood, trying to read her face. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking somewhere past me, like she could still see the things she lost. You don't have to apologize for laughing, I said. That earned a half smile, but her eyes didn't match it. There was a long silence after that, the kind that grows roots. I could hear her shift slightly, crossing her legs, the faint sound of her bracelet sliding down her wrist. You remind me of someone, she said eventually. He used to fix things he didn't need to. Said it made him feel useful. Was he wrong? I asked. She looked at me then, really looked. There was something fragile in her expression, the kind of softness that only shows up when someone's tired of pretending they're fine. No, she said. But it didn't save him. I didn't know what she meant, and she didn't explain. She turned her attention back to her phone, scrolling through nothing, as if to seal whatever door she'd just opened. When I was done, I handed her the keys. She reached out, but instead of taking them right away, her hand hovered, like she'd forgotten what she came here for. Thank you, she said finally. Her voice was quiet, deliberate. And then, almost without thinking, I asked, do you ever get tired of pretending everything's fine? She blinked, not in surprise, but in recognition. Her lips parted, then closed again. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hand over mine to take the keys. Her touch was steady, but her pulse wasn't. When she left, she didn't look back. But the faint tremor in her voice lingered in the air long after the door shut. That night, I kept hearing that single laugh, the one she tried to take back. And somehow, it was louder than anything else. It started raining again, the kind that falls straight down, no wind, just a steady curtain that turns the world into a blurred watercolor. I was finishing the last of the day's work when she appeared at the door, holding a soaked folder against her chest. I didn't mean to come this late, she said. I just didn't want to go home yet. She stood there dripping in the yellow light, and I didn't know which part to respond to, the apology or the confession hiding behind it. Stay, I said, before I could think of a reason she shouldn't. I made coffee, the kind that tastes like rust but feels like warmth, and she took the cup in both hands, watching the rain streak down the window. She looked smaller somehow, not fragile but unguarded, her hair slightly damp, a loose strand clinging to her cheek. She caught me looking and smiled faintly. You must think I'm ridiculous, she said. Not ridiculous, I replied. Just tired. She didn't argue. Instead, she set the coffee down and leaned back against the counter, eyes half closed. You ever feel like you've lived two lives? She asked. One you remember, and one you're still pretending is yours. Her voice trembled on the last word, so quietly I almost missed it. Yeah, I said. Every day. That made her look at me. Really look. It wasn't romantic. It was searching, like she wanted proof someone else knew the same kind of ache. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away. The lights flickered, and for a second, the only sound was the rain. I reached for the coffee pot to pour her another cup, and our hands brushed again. The same accidental electricity as before, but heavier this time, like both of us felt the weight of it. She didn't pull back. Instead, she whispered, almost to herself, "This is wrong." The words hit like cold water, though she didn't move. "I know," I said quietly, "but it doesn't feel like it." Her lips parted, not in surprise, but in hesitation, the kind that holds back years of unsaid things. Then, from her purse, her phone began to ring. A man's name flashed across the screen, David. She turned it face down without answering. The motion was too quick, too practiced. "I should go," she said, her tone suddenly clipped, as if pulling invisible armor back on. "Wait," I started, but she was already reaching for her coat. She hesitated at the door, hand resting on the knob. Rainlight painted her face pale and unreal. "This isn't what you think it is," she said, not looking at me. I didn't answer. She turned then, finally meeting my eyes. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The rain softened, the world narrowed to that single breath between us. And then, she reached up, brushed her thumb across my cheek. Not a caress, not even comfort. Just contact. Just proof. "I shouldn't have come," she whispered. Before I could say anything, she was gone. the door swinging shut behind her, leaving only the sound of the rain and the ghost of her touch cooling on my skin. That night, I told myself I'd forget it. But every time I blinked, I saw the look in her eyes, the one that said she almost stayed. She didn't come for a while after that night. 3 weeks, maybe more. Long enough for me to almost convince myself it had ended there. A brief, strange flicker in the middle of ordinary life. Then one evening, I found her again. Not at the shop this time. She was sitting at a cafe across the street, alone, stirring tea she wasn't drinking. I almost walked past, but she looked up at the exact moment I hesitated. She smiled, faintly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. "Join me?" she asked. I sat down before she could change her mind. The air smelled like coffee and wet pavement, and every sound felt muffled, like the world had decided to keep quiet for us. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For what?" "For walking out. For confusing things." Her tone was measured, almost professional, but her hands were restless, twisting the napkin, then smoothing it, over and over. "You didn't confuse anything," I said softly. "You just left before I could." That made her laugh, not happily, but with a kind of disbelief. "You make everything sound simple." "It isn't," I said. "No," she agreed, looking down. "It isn't." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It had shape, fragile, suspended between us like something that could shatter if either of us breathed too hard. "Finally," she said, "I shouldn't be here." I looked at her, the faint tiredness around her eyes, the way she held herself like someone permanently half ready to leave. "Then why are you?" She didn't answer right away. The seconds stretched, long enough for the waiter to refill her cup, long enough for the streetlights outside to flicker on. "Because," she said eventually, "you look at me like I'm still someone." Her voice broke slightly on that word, and she covered it with a sip of tea that must have gone cold an hour ago. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You are." She shook her head. "You don't know what that means." "Maybe not," I said, "but I know how it feels to be forgotten." That made her still completely. No napkin twisting, no breath, just stillness. Then she looked at me, really looked, and I felt it, that same pulse of something neither of us could name. "I don't want this," she whispered. "I don't even know what this is." Her words weren't sharp, they were pleading. "I know," I said. We sat there, not moving, barely breathing. People came and went around us, voices rising and falling. The world carrying on without noticing two people trying not to fall apart over nothing that ever officially happened. "Finally," she said, "you're too young to understand how much damage silence can do." "Then explain it," I said quietly. She looked out the window. "It's what happens when you stop asking to be seen." The rain outside had started again, soft against the glass. I watched her hand tremble slightly as she reached for her purse. She stood, but didn't move to leave yet. "What are we doing?" she asked. Not accusing, just exhausted. I didn't have an answer. She waited a few seconds, long enough to know I wasn't going to lie to her, then whispered, "That's what scares me." And then she walked out, leaving her untouched tea steaming faintly in the space between us. She didn't come back for more than a month this time. I stopped checking the street whenever the shop bell rang, stopped expecting the sound of her voice. Or at least, I told myself I did. Then one morning, I found an envelope on the counter. No name, just my handwriting on the work order from weeks ago, folded neatly inside. She dropped it off before I opened. Inside was a photograph. Old, faded, maybe 20 years. A man about my age, standing beside her. He had the same dark hair, same uneven grin I'd seen in my reflection too many times. On the back, written in the kind of handwriting that doesn't exist anymore, he used to fix things he didn't have to. No signature, just that line. I stared at it longer than I should have, feeling something shift, like the ground under a rug pulled too slow to notice until you're already falling. That afternoon, I found her waiting in her car across the street. Engine off, window down, like she'd been deciding whether to come in. "You left something," I said, holding up the photo. "I know." Her voice was quiet, rough at the edges. "I wanted you to see him." "Who was he?" She exhaled slowly, eyes tracing the photo instead of me. "My husband. He died 10 years ago." The The words landed softly, but they stayed heavy between us. I'm sorry, I said. It sounded thin, useless. She nodded. He looked like you. Not exactly, just enough that it hurts sometimes. The way you stand, the way you listen before you speak. She smiled faintly, then added, I think that's why I kept coming back. Not because of you. Because for a few minutes, it felt like he hadn't left. I didn't know what to do with that. It wasn't rejection, it was something harder. Being mistaken for a ghost she missed. I'm not him, I said quietly. I know, she said. That's what makes it worse. Silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't charged. It was hollow. She reached across the console, and for a moment, I thought she'd touch me. Instead, she handed me something. A small cassette tape in a cracked plastic case. He left this, she said. A voicemail. I've never listened to it all the way through. Maybe I just need someone else to hear it. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its weight. Absurdly small for something that had lived inside her for 10 years. You sure? No, she said. But maybe that's the point. I didn't play it right away. I just sat there, the rain misting the windshield, her face lit by the dull light of the afternoon. Half here, half somewhere far away. When I finally looked at her again, her eyes were glistening, but she wasn't crying, just holding herself still, as if movement might make everything real. Do you ever wish you hadn't met me? I asked. She hesitated, then said, barely audible, no. I just wish you'd come sooner. Then she started the engine, the sound filling the small space like an ending neither of us had prepared for. And as she drove away, the cassette still cold in my hand, I realized something broke open inside me. Not a wound, but an understanding. I was never the one she was looking for. But for a moment, I'd been close enough to remind her he existed. The tape sat on my nightstand for 3 days before I pressed play. The sound was faint, the kind that makes you lean in to catch it. A man's voice, tired but warm. Hey, if you're hearing this, I guess I didn't fix it this time. I just wanted you to know, don't stay stuck in the empty parts. You always filled the silence better than I did. Then static. Then nothing. I listened twice. Not for the words, but for the pauses, the way he breathed between sentences, how he sounded like he didn't want to hang up. The next day, I drove to her house. She didn't look surprised to see me, just opened the door like she'd been expecting this part. You listened, she said. I nodded. He sounded kind. He was, she said, voice soft. And impossible. Her living room was quiet. Books stacked unevenly, a mug half full on the table, a faint smell of cinnamon that didn't seem intentional. I sat down while she stayed standing, one hand resting on the back of the chair across from me. You want to know what I heard? I asked. She didn't answer, just watched me with that patient, wary expression she wore whenever things got too close. I heard someone trying to let go, I said, but also someone who didn't want her to be alone when she did. Her eyes flickered, just once. Then she sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap like she needed to keep them still. He used to record everything, she said. Birthdays, grocery lists, the cat snoring. After he died, I couldn't delete any of it. It felt like erasing proof. We sat in silence after that. The kind that wasn't heavy or fragile, just real. I don't know how long passed before she spoke again. You remind me of who I was with him, she said. But you also remind me of who I've been since. She looked up then, meeting my gaze. And that's confusing. I know, I said. It's confusing for me too. The rain started again outside, soft against the windows. She stood, walked to the kitchen, then came back with 2 cups of tea, both too strong, neither of us caring. We didn't talk much after that. Every few minutes, our eyes would meet, and we'd look away again, the rhythm of restraint becoming its own kind of closeness. At one point, she reached for her cup, and her fingers brushed mine, not by accident this time. Just a brief, steady touch. She didn't move her hand away. Neither did I. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something quieter, 2 people finally standing still in a story that had always been moving too fast. After a long pause, she said, You should probably go. I know. But neither of us moved. The clock ticked. The rain eased. And in that slow collapse of noise, something in both of us settled. Not like falling, but like exhaling. Finally, She whispered, "Thank you for listening." I nodded. "Thank you for letting me." That was it. No promises, no plans. Just a moment suspended between what we were and what we almost became. When I finally stood to leave, she didn't follow me to the door. She just said, quietly, "Be careful out there," as if she'd already done this before, saying goodbye to someone she shouldn't have loved. And somehow, that single line felt more like love than anything else ever could. It's been 6 months since that last night at her place. I still drive past her street sometimes, not to see her, just to know she's there. That small, quiet certainty feels enough now. The shop hasn't changed much. Same hum of machines, same smell of oil and coffee. But there's a stillness to me now, the kind that doesn't come from peace, but from finally stopping the search for what you can't name. I never saw her again after that evening. No messages, no return visits. The tape she gave me is still in my drawer, inside its cracked plastic case. Sometimes I think about playing it again, but I never do. I already know what's on it. The thing is, it wasn't about her husband, or me, or even what we almost were. It was about seeing someone exactly as they are, without the expectation of being kept. She taught me that love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means holding the space long enough for the other person to breathe again. I think about her laugh, that one, brief, unguarded laugh. I think that's when I really saw her. Not as someone older, not as someone broken, but as someone still capable of surprise. And maybe that's what she gave me too, permission to surprise myself. I've dated since then. Briefly. Nothing heavy. But I notice things now. How someone holds their cup, how they pause before answering, how silence feels between us. She made me aware of that. Of how much of love lives in what we don't say. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself replaying that line she whispered at the end. "Be careful out there." It sounded simple then. Now it feels like the purest kind of affection, the kind that asks for nothing back. I don't think she'll ever know what she changed in me. Maybe that's okay. Some stories aren't meant to be finished. They're meant to leave an echo, to remind us that something real happened, even if it couldn't last. If I ever saw her again, I wouldn't ask about the photo, or the tape, or the husband. I'd probably just thank her for walking in that rainy night, for letting me stand close enough to feel what honesty sounds like when it's whispered. And if I could tell anyone watching this one thing, maybe it's this: don't rush to name what you feel. Some connections don't need a title to matter. Some people pass through your life not to stay, but to wake you up. So if you've ever met someone who made you pause, even for a second, who reminded you what it's like to be seen, don't call it a mistake. Call it a moment. Because sometimes, a moment is all it takes to change what kind of person you are after. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever met someone you weren't supposed to fall for, but did anyway?